You know, I've had a lot to think about actually. Uh, Last episode I mentioned I had a conversation with Kurenai Aki, a certain somebody that's trying to get me to stop reading this series, kind of like a friend trying to deter another friend away from a abusive relationship. I'm just going to talk about this because what's the point of the recap? The recap was it was like the Notre Dame chapter, except this time it's Germany filler, and then it was something to do with winds causing a disaster instead of whatever else was happening. And apparently, that chess set that she used to use to control Hal, apparently, that literally controls him, and it's not like some representation or just visual cue for her. Whatever, that's all I really got. But a conversation I just had with Aki, it occurred to me now. He showed me clips from this one show. It's called "What We Do in the Shadows," and they've got what's called energy vampires, where they're not like blood-sucking vampires. They're more just people that like leech off of your energy, just drain your brains out and just make you feel like you're going crazy. You know, it's like when you're at a meeting that's lasting like 2 hours long, and you're just like, oh, I just want to get out of here. You know, like this is just sucking me dry. It occurred to him that Norman Boutin, apparently that's how it's pronounced. It's not Bouton or whatever, so there's that. He just might be an energy vampire, and I am the freaking whale, the source that's just getting sucked dry from his energy. And just here I am right away. And sorry if you can hear my dog walking in the background. He's been pacing about, and I don't know, he's probably gonna have another stroke. But anyway, here we are. Previously on Empress Theresa, Germany, wind, blah blah blah, meeting. That's about it. This is another 10-pager, so yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Chapter 16. I spent a sleepless night. The unfairness of my position kept the tears flowing. What have I done to deserve this? I thought. It was like when I was 10 years old and Hal first merged with me. I thought of the unfairness of having this thing intrude in my life. Now, the thought was oppressive. The consequences of hell was upon me, and I couldn't escape. There's my dog, sorry. And I couldn't escape, no matter what I did. Whether I returned the declination to the original or not, millions of people would die, and their families would blame me for not doing the opposite. Why did God choose me for these trials? The more I'm reading this, the more I'm starting to think I sound like Greta Thunberg or Thunberg. How dare you? Sorry, that just occurred to me. I'm sorry. People interviewed on television said they envied me my glamorous power and importance. A comma could have worked there. They envied me my glamorous power and importance. Oh, really? Who would trade places with me now? I was learning something new about remorse. You can feel guilty about doing something wrong, or not doing something you should have. You can also have remorse for doing something good the wrong way. I shouldn't have let Blair lead me to handling Hal alone. I should have invited a committee to share power. Things might have turned out better, or at least it wouldn't be taking all the blame. At least I wouldn't be taking all the blame alone. I guess that is the regret of a lot of old people when they look back and realize too late what might have been. This was, oh my gosh, my dog just keeps barking. Anyway, this was what President Martin regretted. He thought he was doing something good. It was a disaster. How can anybody know what is the right thing to do? Steve and I lay awake on our backs until the early hours. There was nothing to say. Around 4 in the morning, Steve got up and walked out of the room. It wasn't his usual hour for a pit stop. In a moment, I got up to see where he'd gone. He was sitting at the computer in my workroom. I watched him for a while from the door without his noticing me. Steve came up with the weirdest ideas in the world. If he had something to fix this if he had something to fix this problem, I wouldn't want to disturb him. I went back to bed. If he came up with something, he'd tell me all about it in the morning. Here's what Steve was doing. He booted the computer to do internet research. He had figured out that there was no earthly solution to this problem. He needed to look elsewhere. What was the elemental composition of the sun? He found the answer quickly. The sun was 73.4% hydrogen and 25.0% helium. That left 1.6% of the sun made up of other stuff, and 1.6% was a lot. It was equal to 4,000 Earths. He found a list of the most abundant solar elements. The sun was 0.2% carbon. That was surprising. The sun was a dirty place. The article mentioned that there were 67 elements in the sun in sufficient quantities to be measurable by spectrometry, if I'm saying that right. That would include virtually every common element found on Earth. Steve thought about it. Which of these elements would be useful to prevent hurricanes? It would be a gas, one that was heavier than air, that would that would stay near near the ground and make the updrafts of hurricanes impossible, or at least much less severe. It was a simple idea. But which gas? As a physics major, he knew a little chemistry. There was a family of elements called inert gases that would not react with anything else and poison the atmosphere. He went through the list. Xenon, second from the bottom of the list, was nearly 4 times as dense as air and had no radioactive isotopes. It was perfect. After breakfast, Steve and I went for a walk in the woods. I was still visibly shaken, and he gently introduced me to his idea. He knew I was close to the brink. He knew nobody could endure the pressure I'd been having without some effects on the mind. Even the media was talking about the state of my mental health. Somebody, Blair or Parker, must have said something to him. Now he was trying to introduce me to the wildest idea he'd come up with yet. I've been thinking. Do you know what xenon gas is? Yeah, it's used in lights. It's an inert element. It's nearly 4 times as heavy as air. We already talked about that. If there was a lot of it in the atmosphere, there wouldn't be hurricanes because the warm air on the ground couldn't get up fast. Was there a lot of xenon? On the sun. The sun has all the elements. They can be separated by their melting points. He didn't push further than that, but let me think about it as we slowly walked through the woods. 30 minutes later, we got back to the mansion, and I gave my opinion. It might be possible. I'll need Mr. Blair to build something that will take a temperature measuring device to the sun, so I can watch the temperatures. We'll call it Sky Spy. There's no landmarks in space, and I can't triangulate the sun's position to Hal. But if they put cameras on Sky Spy, I can see where the sun is and give orders to Hal. I'll call Blair. Prime Minister Blair arrived that afternoon with 36 scientists and engineers. There was also a Royal Air Force general. Steve was the physics major, and he did most of the negotiating with these guys while I stood by. It was fun watching their surprised faces. After explaining about the need for xenon, I don't know. I studied this freaking element in high school and I still don't remember how it's pronounced. After explaining about the element of xenon, Steve went into how to get it. One thing I couldn't do was triangulate a position in space. I would have to be told where Sky Spy was. The scientists were very excited. They came up with a scheme of 16 satellites orbiting the sun to serve as a GPS system. They proposed a set of simple levers for Sky Spy that their satellites would control for automatically, relying information about Sky Spy's position and what changes were needed. Could I get Hal to respond automatically to these levers? Yes. They asked another question. When you manipulate the gas... this is them asking. When you manipulate the... Oh my freaking... Sorry, my dog. He's like on his last legs right now. He's probably, gonna be dying. Has had a few strokes and issues, so I need to let it pass. Where was where was I? Yes, they asked another question. When you manipulate the gas masses, could you do it some distance away from Sky Spy instead of directly underneath? I guess. Why? You'll be dumping unwanted material back down to the sun. We want to see what happens. We can learn a lot about the sun. Next page. Okay. They were pleased with that. I saw. Hold on. They were pleased with that. I saw a couple of them shaking each other's hands. It was an astronomer's dream come true. A close-up look at disturbances in the sun's surface. It would generate 1,000 scientific papers. The Royal Air Force General now spoke up. Could you also bring in helium? Steve looked puzzled. I guess. What good is it? If helium was plentiful, we could send up thousands of miniature dirigibles, I don't know, over territory invaded by terrorist groups. They would be lighter than air drones surveying the land for weeks at a time. We could put the terrorist organizations out of business. Steve and I looked at each other. What a great idea this was. I'll do it, I said. A team of 1,200 experts from all over the West was assembled in London. They quickly threw together the GPS satellite from pre-existing components. These satellites were ridiculous-looking assemblies, resembling high school science fair projects, but appearance didn't count. Capital T, whatever. Yeah, their appearances didn't count. They only had to work. They had small rockets to precisely adjust their solar orbits. I sent them off to the sun. I wasn't interested in mechanical devices and didn't pay much attention to the Sky Spy monstrosity they made. Describing details would get me arrested as a public nuisance. Basically, it was a 36-foot wide platform with every kind of scientific device the scientists could think of. All I needed was the temperature and a visual of what was happening. I moved Sky Spy to 4 million miles above the sun's north pole and went to work. The principle was simple enough. Hal grabbed a gigantic mass of solar gas and raised it to high altitudes where it cooled off. This made it possible to separate the elements. After Hal grabbed a handful of xenon, I had him rush it to Earth at really super high speed. As it got close to Earth, I had Hal slow it down to a safer speed and stretch it out into a long, thin stream. The stream reached the North Pole. By now, it was frozen solid. I let go of the end a few hundred feet at the time, giving it a last-second squeeze to break the brittle crystal into countless harmless small pieces. The xenon showered down all over the top of the world. At night, millions of people stood outside watching what looked like a dense meteor shower raining down in every direction. It was the xenon entering the atmosphere. A month went by. Xenon was now accounting for 2 ounces of atmospheric pressure. Tropical hurricanes attempted to stir themselves up, but were only storms with 40-mile-per-hour gusts and were infrequent. The power to raise up billions of tons of xenon-heavy air per second didn't exist. It was soon pointed out that warm air was breaking through the thermal layers and rising slowly in hundreds of places over the entire ocean instead of rapidly in a small area, resulting in a 1,000-mile-wide hurricane system. It was nice that I wouldn't have to kill 500 million Asians. So much for that problem. Wait. It was nice that I wouldn't have to kill 500 million Asians. So okay, oh my gosh. I misread that as her, like, implying the Asians were a problem, and it's like, oh, so much for not being able to kill... Oh, I had to double take that. Anyway. I hadn't forgotten about the helium that Air Force General wanted. 3 weeks after the xenon arrived, so did the helium. The military had something to play... Next page? To play with. So it was a sad day for the terrorists. The atmosphere was soon 0.1% helium, which didn't sound like much, but it was 1,000,000 times what it had been. It could easily be separated out by centrifuges. The wind, rain, thermal expansion of water, food, and heat problems were permanently fixed. This was the end of my problems with the natural world. Because this just seems like a common occurrence. It's like, oh, we fixed the water energy problem. Oh no, now this problem showed up. Oh great, now we fixed this problem and I felt at ease. Oh, now another problem shows up. Oh, how can I handle so much pressure? It's just that over and over and over again. And then in between that is just spurts like trips to Notre Dame or trips to Germany or I don't know. I think there were talks about Ireland. Maybe they did go to Ireland. I'm genuinely forgetting some of this stuff. But whatever. End of my problems with the natural world. Also, if anybody is like more of a science nerd than I am, like I know xenon is just a really bright element as far as I know. Maybe I'm really wrong, but how much of this would really play out this way? If anybody has any knowledge on this, please let me know in the comments, and I can probably give you a nice big fat pin for that. And dog's walking by again. Anyway, I wasn't so naive as to think all my problems were over. I wish. A lot of people in the world were jealous of my power. They were sure to come after me. Many statesmen predicted it. Blair visited with 4 guys from NASA. They had interesting questions. Could I put a large telescope on the moon? Yep, I can do that. Throw something together and I'll deliver it. Could I put a roving robot on Mars? No. The problem is the time delay. I can't give HAL instructions exact enough to keep it from crashing. Put together a package and I'll put it in orbit around Mars. You can take over from there. How big could this Mars package be? Any size, 1,000,000 tons. It doesn't matter to HAL. We hesitate to ask. Europa is a moon of Jupiter. It has an ocean covered with ice, and we think it has a chance of harboring life. But it's far away and the ice is thick. It may take 200 years to get a sample. Could you get a sample? How big is Europa? It's slightly smaller than the moon. I'll put Europa in orbit around Mars. Okay, this moon I'll put in orbit around Mars. That sounds like a recipe for solar disaster, if you ask me, but it's whatever. Tilting the planet, making winter last for eternity. Yeah, sure, we're just gonna make it work because Theresa, the powers of plot. The visitors were astonished. Then they laughed and gushed with exuberant thank yous. That left them plenty to brag about back home. Meanwhile, I was working on a really interesting project. Fort Knox, Kentucky, was the site of the United States Gold Depository. It contained 147 million ounces of gold. Ugh, I got like saliva. I guess I'm allergic to nonsense. 40 million ounces of gold, and was protected by hundreds of feet of open space surrounding it in all directions. The property had many secret security systems to prevent anybody from stepping on the land. In addition, it was surrounded by an army base of 40,000 soldiers. The rarely used front entrance was on the eastern side of the building, and the most open field and the closest to army facilities was the western field. I don't know why army keeps getting capitalized, but whatever. NORAD's radar detected something coming down to Earth over the North Pole. It was moving at a steady 120 miles per hour, and it seemed to be a narrow line some hundreds of miles long. As the night went by, it lowered to an altitude of 100 miles, and then covered to the horizontal heading south. There was no alarm. This obviously had something to do with me. President Stinson was awakened and advised of the situation. Military planes with telescopes flew to northern Canada to get a visual. It was not a steady line, but rather a stream of small yellow objects. The yellow stream, excuse the expression. Is that a pee joke? Continued due south at high altitude. By 2:00 p.m., it was directly over Fort Knox, Kentucky. The stream made a sharp turn and headed straight down. In less than 2 hours, it reached ground. At 2 foot wide, next page, almost perfectly, wait, hold up. At 2 foot wide, almost perfectly spherical ball of gold hit the middle of the large field. I have no idea how I'm supposed to read this sentence. large field west of the gold depository. Again, gold depository is not capitalized. A half second later, another ball of gold hit the ground, and another, and another. By now, people on the ground had been alerted. The gold was coming, and thousands lined the fences surrounding the depository. Okay, we're away from the end of the world, and now I'm guessing none of this has to do with anything. The gold balls stacked up in a very shallow pyramid. In a half an hour, there was easily more gold on the field than inside the depository, and it kept coming down. Excuse me. The gold balls made a loud thump as they landed on the growing pile. Excuse me. They weighed about 4 tons apiece. In 22 hours, the last of the gold balls came down. The mountain of gold was hundreds of feet wide and much higher than the depository. It was worth trillions of dollars at current prices. And there's a lot more where that came from. Or sorry, and there was a lot more, and there's a lot more where that came from, said Steve, who watched the spectacle on television with me. There was. I could bring down any amount. Prime Minister Blair called me and asked what the price would be. $50 an ounce, I said. I am relieved. I don't know who's song. I am relieved. Your president said if I didn't get the price down to $100, the United States would declare war on England. Now you tell me. We both laughed. He said plentiful. Low-priced gold had 1,000 uses in industry besides being a monetary stabilizer and basic material for jewelry. I pleased him again, saying I'd bring millions of tons of silver down to a British Army base and sell it for $5 an ounce as long as people were willing to buy the stuff. British silversmiths could have fun working the metal. Blair thanked me for providing thousands of jobs. The media jumped on the story. The silver would provide stable pocket money for all the people on Earth. The common people could have real money to spend, money that was exchangeable across all borders. The benefits to nations' economies was unimaginable. So they just said, "Oh, hey, Theresa, you just want to move this gold all over the place. Like, I'm losing this. It's just like she has the ability to do it, and she's just like, oh, why don't I just move all this gold?" And I was like, oh, okay. Anyway, unimaginable. I hired Jan Struthers as my financial manager and sent her to Kentucky to set up the gold business. She found a small iron foundry in Lexington and made them an offer to buy the place. They quickly accepted. It was infinitely more interesting to work with gold than iron. Gold from the Fort Knox field was melted down into gold ingots a little over 3 inches square and an inch thick. 3 inches square and an inch thick. These little ingots weighed what Jan thought was an amazing 6.85 pounds. They were worth $5,000 apiece. She had them put in Brinks trucks for transport to New York City, where they were sold through banks. Corporations were already blabbering about all the things they could do with the metal. Within a month, I was a billionaire. I wondered what my old BC boyfriend Jack Coster, Jack Coster was thinking of all this. Okay, that's the end of this chapter. She's a billionaire and they just gave her access to gold. Okay, as far as I understand, this just kind of comes off as filler. Oh yeah, shocker with that, by the way. Because I'd say that if you had to skip all the chapters that didn't really amount to much, I'd say you're best off skipping probably 28 chapters of this book, but I don't know. They just gave her, she's just like, oh yeah, can I get into Fort Knox? And like, yeah, sure, like take over the world. Like I'm really getting sick of doing these after chapter thoughts because it's like, what is there to say? I'm just repeating myself at this point. I'm wasting my time talking about it, and I'm wasting your time just trying to summarize all this. It's like, oh yeah, gold, and they fixed everything. So whatever. The most I can really think about is that, like I said, this seems filler. I mean, it might go somewhere, but I don't think it is. I think it's just a power fantasy to show that Theresa can do all these things. Apparently there's limits, like she can't put a rover on Mars, but she can what, move an entire moon? Is that what they were implying? And move gold? There's some limits, and there's like no limits at the same time. Like there's not. It's very vague what Hal is not able to do, despite being able to do crazy things like tilt the Earth or whatever else. But I don't know. I mean, I'm still like I still think that I'm just a source for energy vampirism that Norman Boutin might be doing, and if I'm not dumb, I'm gonna leave a link to what I'm talking about for those of you back at home. But whatever, that's the end of this chapter. Have a good one.